morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this morning. From 1nvest, we really appreciate you offering your valuable time to come and join us and our colleagues here today as we launch our second annual 1nvest Think Forum. 1nvest was launched about 3 years ago, and from there, due to the support from yourselves, our valuable clients, we've only managed to grow from success to success. Today, we'll specifically cover how the index tracking industry has developed, touching on how you can use index products, unit trust, ETF, within your roles and supporting your clients in order to achieve their dreams. We've got a whole panel of speakers, local experts and international experts lined up for you. And I think we're quite privileged to have them here today for their valuable time as well, so that they can share their views and thoughts and journeys through life. To my colleagues, thank you very much, everybody, for putting this together. And please enjoy yourself for the day. If there's any questions, please feel free. This is an interactive session. It's not just a standing in front and talking to yourselves. It's meant to be interactive and very educational. Our first two sessions this morning will touch on the socio-economical developments in South Africa, as well as the intergenerational wealth and how you manage that for your clients as the transfer of wealth is occurring. As our first speaker, I'd like us to introduce you to Ndivhuho. She is an economist at STANLIB, and I think we'll learn a lot from her on her views on the socio-economical landscape in South Africa currently. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thanks, Johan. I'm very honored to be here today. Unfortunately, my topic is going to be a bit of a downer. Specifically, I'll be looking at South Africa's current socio-economic landscape. And specifically, I'll actually be trying to determine whether South Africa is on a path to redemption or whether heading down the road of becoming a failed state. Now, when you think of these two concepts, sort of picture them on I guess sort of a scale. So on the one side of the scale, we have what you might call like a mecca of a state, right? It's an effectively run state that everybody loves being. Everybody's willing to pay their taxes because they get exactly what they need and what they want from their government and from their state. Now, on the other side of the scale, we have the exact opposite, right? We have a completely dysfunctional state, a state that isn't even able to provide the most basic of services to its citizens. Nobody wants to be there. Most people have left, and those who are still there are there because they have no other choice. They cannot get out. Now, what I'll try and unpack today is, where does South Africa sit on the spectrum? So are we closer to becoming a failed state? Are we closer to being completely dysfunctional? Or are we closer to being the mecca of all states? And even though, let's say we are closer to being a failed state, are we heading in the right direction? Are we heading further down this abyss, the bad side of this spectrum? Now, before we can actually decide if South Africa is a failed state and where it's sitting, we need to define what a failed state is. And unfortunately, there isn't a commonly understood or commonly accepted definition of a failed state, but everybody agrees they know it when they see it. And that's because there are two characteristics of a failed state that define a failed state, really. The first one is that the government or the state is incapable of providing the functions that are expected of government, including law and order, military defense, a stable economy for people to participate in, and the provision of your basic services like healthcare and education. And because they're incapable of doing this, it kind of leads to the second characteristics, where people have lost trust in that government. Now, once you have lost trust in your government, what it tends to lead to is increased civil violence, higher levels of crime, more corruption, infrastructure that's falling apart, and basically people are a law unto themselves at this point. Now, with that said, what actually, or how do nations fail? There are 8 characteristics, or 8 warning signs, I think, warning signs of a failing state, or that a state is heading towards failure. Now, these characteristics or warning signs can be divided into 2 blocks. They're either economic in nature or they're political in nature. I want you to search as an audience, look at these warning signs, and then take South Africa from 1994 till now. And you look at them and decide, out of all these 8, which one is applicable to South Africa? For example, for me, I think the most applicable right now, and easily most applicable for South Africa, is that there's high and transparent levels of inequality and poverty in South Africa. It's not really hard to see. If you just look at Santon and Alex, they sit really, really close to each other. So each side of the area can see what the other is going through. This kind of transparency sort of creates a lot of tension and a lot of anger, especially from the people who are living on the have-not side of it. So that's definitely something that is present in South Africa. Now, once you've read all of these and you've decided, okay, South Africa ticks this many, count the number of tick marks you've put on there. If you have 5 or more ticks that you think are present in South Africa, then you think that South Africa is clearly headed down the road of failure. It is basically no turning back if 5 of the warning signs are present in South Africa. Now, I know you tried to be as objective as possible. I didn't tell you to be, but hopefully you were. But I know there was still some level of subjectivity there, right? We love our country, or we're very angry about our country, so we will have subjectivity that creeps in. Luckily, we don't have to depend on your subjectivity to decide if South Africa is heading down this sort of road to failure. There is a global fragility index that is calculated or determined and, I guess, generated by internationally, where they use a number of methodologies, both sort of numeric in nature and research and analysis they take, where they determine a country's fragility score. Now, the higher your score is, the more fragile you are, and the lower it is, the less fragile you are. So you're trying to get to 0. Nobody gets to 0, but that's where we're trying to head as a country. As you can see, unfortunately for South Africa, our trend has been going in the wrong direction. We have consistently, since 2006, when this index was created, we've been heading in the wrong direction. There was some improvement between 2018 and 2021 or 2020, but that was short-lived, and in 2022 we had a deterioration, and it's hard to think that this is going to turn around this year, especially given all the developments that have been taking place in the first 2 months of the year. And if you take these scores and you rank them with the other countries, there are 179 countries that are included in this index. And if you rank all the countries based on these scores, you get sort of the ranking. You want to be as high as possible, sorry. So you want to be country number 179, the least fragile country. And you want to stay away from being country number 1. Unfortunately for South Africa, again, because of our score deteriorating, we've been heading down the wrong side of the rankings. We are now the 79th most fragile country in the world. And that is a bit concerning, because not too long ago, we're sitting in the 90s and the 100s in terms of our fragility ranking. But now we're sitting at 79. And the sad thing about South Africa is that in order to be considered to be like in the top 50 countries, so like the top 50 least fragile countries, you need to be ranked at either 90 or above. And South Africa hasn't been above 90 in a very long time. And the reason for this is because not only has South Africa been deteriorating over this time, and the deterioration has been quite clear, but other countries have been deteriorating at a slower pace. So we are sort of the winners in terms of deterioration. And those countries that are not deteriorating, that are actually improving over time, are also beating us. So this has led to this, I guess, significant deterioration since 2007, where it peaked. Now, if you take the countries and see where does South Africa sit in relation to other countries, who are the lowest, who are the highest, who are the best? And it's no surprise that the best are considered the Scandinavian countries, right? A lot of people can say your Finland, your Norway have some of the best states in the world, some of the best run governments. And it's not surprising that at the bottom, we have your war-torn countries, your countries that have a lot of violence, a lot of corruption, very high levels of poverty, and basically are considered dysfunctional. Your DRC is there, we have Zimbabwe there, we have Syria. And in terms of South Africa's peers, it's not, another thing that's not surprising is that South Africa is sitting around some of what you'd consider our emerging market peers. So we have Brazil close to us, we have Mexico, we have Thailand sitting around the same area that we're sitting, we have Russia and India there, which means even though our politics and the politics around each country is vastly different, our socio-economic landscape and where we are is vastly similar. There might be some changes over the years, but this group has always moved together over the years. Well, South Africa has obviously moved faster down the road, but it's always been sitting around this area in terms of our peers, if you will, in terms of fragility. Now, the last 3 graphs, I guess, showed you the direction that South Africa is heading. We are certainly not heading towards becoming a maker state. We are more heading towards sort of becoming a failing or a failed state in sort of based on this fragility index. But what it doesn't actually tell us is where are we at this point in time? So if you have the spectrum and there's a middle, are we this side of the sort of center or are we this side of the center? And although we are getting worse, it might be not as bad if we're on this side of the spectrum getting slightly worse towards that side, because then we're still sort of above 50. And in order to sort of determine that, so how fragile is South Africa, the fragility index actually does group countries based on their scores into sort of 10 categories or 10 ratings, ranging from very sustainable down to high alert. So you have your best countries at very sustainable, and you have your worst of worst countries on high alert. And this is an actually interesting measure, because even if you're last, let's say you're country number 1 out of all the countries, if your score is high enough, you could still be considered a stable country, right? But if your score is low enough, then you head further and further down into the reds and the orange and the yellow. And what you're trying to do is be at the greens and the blues. Now, if you look at this, where do you think South Africa actually sits? Are we more, so let's say we've deteriorated, sure, but are we still in the green area? Are we in the blue area? Unlikely. Or are we in the yellow or in the orange? Are we in the red even? If you look at the countries, and actually more importantly, where has South Africa moved from? So did we go from being dark green to being light green? Did we go from being blue to green? Or did we go from being yellow to being on high alert at sort of very red territory? Unfortunately, South Africa has gone from being considered a stable country. In 2006, we were talked about in the same way as you talk about Greece or the Seychelles or Botswana. And now in 2022, we are down being considered a elevated warning country. Now, it's not really necessarily a bad thing to be considered an elevated warning country. The vast majority of countries are sitting in that level. Emerging market countries tend to be sort of elevated warning in their nature because they're emerging market, they're developing, right? That's why you see a lot of the developed countries are in the blues and the greens, while developing countries are sitting down there with the yellows and the reds. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the rate of deterioration that has taken place in the last 15 years. So we're considered stable. So we've been talked about along with other developed countries in 2006, and now we are down to elevate. And this only took 15 years, and this is not a very long time for something like this to happen. And the concerning thing is that what is going to happen in the next 15 years if nothing changes in South Africa, right? If the same trend keeps going, you could see South Africa moving from being elevated warning all the way down to being on alert. Now, when you're down on alert, you're being talked about in the same way as Lebanon and Venezuela. And it's not hard to see South Africa going in that direction because it's already done so, right? In the last 15 years. In the next 15 years, it can do it again. And in the next 25 years, it's quite possible that South Africa could end up on high alert. Now, by then, you're being talked about in the same way as Syria. And that for sure is considered a failing or a failed state by that point. And although 25 years seems like a long time to come, most of us in this room will probably still be alive by that time. And if nothing changes, it's hard to imagine South Africa not actually heading down this road. So I think maybe I sort of answered the question in terms of where South Africa currently sitting and the direction that it's taking, and it's a bit concerning. Now let's go back to South Africa's fragility score itself. These are the different criteria that are used to determine South Africa's fragility. As you can see, the higher the number, like I said, the worse off you are, and the lower the number, the better. The ones that are highest are your economy, your economic inequality, the demographics are sitting up there at the top. And if you actually look at the numbers from 2006 to now 2022, you actually see that the criteria, the indicator that deteriorated the most during that time was the economy, right? It went from a score of around 2.2 in 2006 and is now sitting at 8. And it's not surprising seeing that this happened because look at how economic growth has deteriorated. In 2006, we were sitting at 5% growth, even heading for 6% if you tried hard enough. And now it's going to be even hard for us to get to 1% growth. The SARB estimates that we're going to grow by 0.3% this year, and that's nowhere near what is needed to actually get the economy back on track. Unemployment, we worked quite hard. I mean, it was still pretty high, but we were going in the right direction in terms of reducing unemployment by 2007, 2008. But since then, it's been going in the wrong direction. Unemployment has increased. Poverty has increased. People's lives have actually gotten systematically worse over time. Now, with that said, the interesting thing, while most of these criteria deteriorated since 2006 and now, there are actually two criteria that improved over time. And the one will actually surprise you. The economic inequality one was actually an improvement. It wasn't much of an improvement. It went from like a score of 8.9 in 2006 is now sitting at 7.9. And it kind of shows that government has made efforts to try and reduce inequality by having your social payments, by trying to improve access to your basic services like water, electricity, by giving people some housing and allowing them to actually be able to find a place to stay as they go through their lives. But it clearly has not been enough. There's still a lot of work to be done, and government is not putting in the effort that is needed to actually arrest this problem. Now, if you take these criteria and put them in the same sort of rating as like being on a high alert or being more sustainable, you can see that the situation is quite concerning. The economic growth one and unemployment, the economic inequality are still sitting at alert level. Improvement, yes, but still sitting at an alert level in terms of economic inequality. And if you look at your social service delivery, it's also sitting at, if I look there, on high warning. Right? And I think we all understand why. Electricity, water supply, it's all a big issue that government is unable to provide the services that it needs to its citizens. And it's actually quite hard to see that moving more towards your yellow or your green. We're probably going to continue heading towards the alert level and high alert level in terms of social, service delivery in that sense. I guess if I need to give you guys some good news because it's seeming quite bad. But if you look at the graph, you see that there are 3 areas where South Africa is in the green, right? We're considered stable or highly stable, I guess. And the interesting one that I want to discuss is the human flight and brain drain criteria. There's been a lot of, like over the years, people have been saying, South Africans are leaving the country, people are emigrating, our talent is leaving, we are losing everybody who can actually fix this country because they're going to different countries. But I think it was overstated. This index shows that, yes, there has been some deterioration, people have left, but the vast majority of people have stayed. And that is something that we need to focus on. And we need to see that although it's concerning, we're still stable when it comes to brain drain. There's a lot of talent here and a lot of people who can help push this country in the right direction. Now, taking all this into consideration, we believe, and by we, it's me, I believe these are the risks that are present in South Africa. So these are like the most immediate risks. And the biggest one is the high level of unemployment and the high level of inequality and poverty in South Africa. That one issue sort of cascades into other issues. The lack of resources means government is unable to provide services as effectively. People are forced to live in informal settlements because they do not have access to affordable housing and they do not have access to the services that they need. So once you arrest the one problem, I think it'll be easier to solve the other problems and the risks that are present in South Africa. But these risks are the sort of immediate issues that South Africa is facing. And within the high unemployment, the real concern is actually the youth unemployment, because when youth has nothing else to do, they're going to cause trouble. And that is something that you need to look out for. Now, I think sort of the stick that will break the camel's back in this instant is this. Right, the number of days of load shedding that we've had. I didn't include 2023, but I think we all know every day since the 1st of January, we've had load shedding. We are expected to continue to have load shedding, another 200 days of load shedding in 2023. We only had 75 in 2021. We even had less before that, but the issue has deteriorated. The infrastructure, generation, there's just issues, and this is not the only issue, right? Load shedding or electricity availability is not the only problem that we're facing. There's water constraint issues too. In Gauteng alone, the last couple of months, we've had issues with water shortages, water cuts, water disruptions, and it's not because our dams are running dry. Our dams are actually quite fine. We've had a lot of rain. There's a lot of water available. It's just that the infrastructure, the water infrastructure, is failing us, and that failure, it was made worse by load shedding, but that failure has been happening over the years, and it's something that continues to take place. The deterioration is getting worse and worse. And the one reason why this is happening is because of this, right? The lack of fixed investment in the country. Since 2008, fixed investment has been on a downward trend. Government, your SOEs, and even the private sector are not investing in infrastructure or any fixed assets in the country. Now, it's not surprising that SOEs are not investing in this. They're barely able to run. They need to keep going to government to get bailouts. Government doesn't have the money either. They cannot, their focus is always on consumption expenditure. So making sure the wage bill is paid, making sure that your social payments are being paid. So there's very little left to actually invest in your infrastructure and make that commitment. Now, you have your private sector. Now, private sector has a lot of money. I mean, we have wealth managers, so clearly there's a lot of money going around. And they have that money, and it's all sitting in banks. If you go look at the deposits by corporates, you're going to see that it's at a highest level it's ever been. And that because corporates are uncertain, they're scared to invest their money, they want to park the money. They're not trying to get into fixed investment. They're not sure where the country's going to be in the next 5 years. They're not sure that their investment is actually going to yield any return or any meaningful return. So they've lost confidence, basically, in the country and in the ability of the country to actually produce any returns for them. So they also refuse to invest. And all these things lead to South Africa just becoming poorer. If you look at the GDP per capita, so if you take all the money that's in the country and divide it equally among the people in the country, it's been getting lower and lower over the years. It peaked in 2013, 2014, but since then it's been going downhill. And it was made worse by COVID, but the situation wasn't necessarily improving before that anyways. So people are getting poorer. There's not enough money to go around, and there's not much you can do. And when people are getting poorer, they're getting more desperate. And they can see the inequality building, getting worse and worse and worse. And that means they're getting more frustrated with the government and more frustrated with the people who they perceive to have the money and are not willing to share it. Now, if South Africa had to go down the road of becoming a failed state, this is the path that it would take. It'd be an economic, route where you start from ongoing weak economic performance because government is refusing to implement some of the key reforms that are needed, and then we get to increased levels of scarcity. There are less resources to go around. Government is unable to provide the services that they promised people because they don't have the money to actually provide that. People don't have money. People don't get the things that they expect from government. And what do? They protest, right? So the levels of social protest will increase. And at some point, the angrier people get and the more the issue is not resolved, the angrier and the more violent these protests can get. And they can get quite uncontrollable. And we think we saw a glimpse of that during the 2021 looting. And if that becomes widespread and uncontrolled, then we can have some serious issues. By that point, government will have no choice but to bring in the army, become violent, and declare a state of emergency. And once a government does that, and they do not arrest the issue of violence, they lose the legitimacy, people start looting at an even bigger scale, the currency collapses, and by that point, we might as well be called a failed state and pack things up and move somewhere else. I'm not saying this is going to happen. There are some good things. We are headed in certain areas. We are headed in the right direction. There are some reforms that we've seen government do. The most top of mind and the most visible one is the Energy Action Plan. It's been 6 months now, but I think as we go ahead with this year, we're going to see it become more clearer. We're going to get the private sector actually starting to build some of the projects that they've been talking about. The positive impact of it is not going to be felt maybe this year or even next year, but by 2025, if things keep going in this direction, we could get better electricity provision as long as the private sector keeps actively participating in this area. Another important area that I think is very important is that there's widespread acceptance, by government. And this is quite an important thing because it hasn't been the case for a very long time where they realize that they need public-private partnerships. They need the private sector to come and actually do this for them because they don't have the money, they barely have the skills. So they need to actually actively participate with the private sector to get things in the right direction. And this acceptance will go a long way in ensuring that some infrastructure development does take place with the help of the private sector. They cannot do it alone. And some of these reforms might seem very slow and they're very, minimal. I mean, the NPA is doing a lot of work in terms of prosecuting corruption. It's very slow. It's not the people we want to see, but it's actually happening. And I think that's heading in the right direction. We just need to see sort of the fruits of this labor that we are seeing taking place. So not everything is bad news. Not everything is great news, but we're not going to die. We're not going to, I don't think, personally, and maybe more of hope speaking, I don't think we're going to become a failing state. I don't think we're going to become a failed state as long as we keep going in this right direction. Thank you very much, guys.
Morning, everyone. Thank you to 1nvest for this lovely opportunity. I'm sure I speak on behalf of my esteemed panelists when I say we're very excited to talk about our topic today, which is intergenerational wealth management and how can advisors future-proof their business and their relevance to new generations. Quite a tongue twister, but we'll do our best today to provide not only the theory, but also some practical steps around what it means for you, your business, and ultimately your clients. Before we start, I'd like to introduce everyone. My name is Melissa Dyer. I'm a certified financial planner and managing director at Harbour Wealth, an independent financial services provider. I've also got Lloyd Buthelezi, who is head of Standard Bank Financial Consultancy. Next up, we've got Shalia Naidoo, a behavioural science manager at Standard Bank. And down that side, we've got Kagisho Mahura, Chief Executive Officer at Gradidge-Mahura Investments. Right, so this morning, everyone, our aim is really to discuss and reveal insights about how advisors of today should firstly approach segmenting and defining generations in respect of their financial investment preferences. We will also be reviewing some tools and methods that advisors should employ in engaging with that next generation of investors that are more tech savvy. We're not going to escape the tech debate today. They have a much wider access to information. They understand financial products. They know that it's a deep area. And let's be honest, guys, they want that information yesterday. So at their fingertips, relevant, up to date. We'll also explore what crucial gaps exist and how advisors can remain relevant to an ever-changing client base. It's a lot we have to talk about and manage as advisors. The markets are the easy bit, guys. The people, that's always the hard bit. So first up, Shalia, as our behavioural science guru, can you please talk to us about and explain what the key differences are in each generation and how they view investing? And also, what are the important behavioural biases we should consider in our practices?
Cool, thank you. So I think in order to understand the key differences, we really need to look at each generation and really see how their experiences have, shaped their financial behaviour. So I'm going to split between older and younger generation. Don't want to offend anyone. I think we're all young at heart, but I'm going to just split it like that. So we have our older generation, which are your baby boomers and your Gen X. So your baby boomers are your post-World War II generation. They are known as the golden age of capitalism. So we see a lot of economic growth and prosperity here, a lot of optimism when we're thinking about our financial futures. So the main goal here was to kind of accumulate wealth and enough wealth for retirement. Yeah, so I think there was a very clear mental representation of what financial planning looked like. People were doing generally the same thing and it was working, so there was no need to kind of move out of that rigidity. So the general focus here was kind of unit trust and retirement planning. Then we have Gen X. So here we see a little bit more economic uncertainty and a lot more competition in the job market, and I think that really defines them as a more cautious generation when it comes to looking at financial future. So I think here's where we start to see this concept of the safety net being created, this financial safety net. And the main focus areas here were your kind of risk and legacy products. Then if we start to look at the younger generation, so we're starting with millennials, this generation came of age during the internet boom. And so they had access to lots and lots and lots of information, and they used this information to make their own decisions. So they could make their own decisions, and they also had the technology that helped them act on these decisions really easily. This generation also experienced a lot of economic instability and a lot of economic volatility. We see the highest rates of unemployment ever. We see extreme competition in the job market. We see this is actually also the generation that, it's the first generation in history, actually, that accumulated less assets, that accrue less assets than their parents. So, you see millennials entering the housing market later. You see them buying cars later. There's a lot less means in this generation than if we look at the parents' and grandparents' generation at the same age. So there's a combination of means, not having enough means, and so this relationship with the advisor fits a lot less seamlessly into this generation as the generations before. You have this combination of the means, and then also the fact that they have access to information, so they don't necessarily need to use advisors. Then we have the Gen Zs, very fascinating generation, the first generation to be completely immersed in technology. They speak the digital language. That's all they do. I think they're also the generation that is most influenced by their peers and the people around them. So there's a lot of social proofing involved. Social proofing is when, in times of uncertainty, we look to those around us, and that influences our decisions. Then we see, a lot of social media. They're following financial influencers. They're following people that they can relate to, that kind of look maybe like them, seem like them, speak like them, and this is super interesting because they're getting information from these people in a format that they understand. It's in bite-sized pieces that they can understand, and we see this concept of representativeness. If the regular person, closes their eyes and thinks about what the traditional financial advisor looks like, it's generally a middle-aged man with traditional values, and I think to the regular person. But now we see this concept of the financial advisor completely changing. It's completely in flux now with this younger generation because it's people that look like me, maybe similar ages, etc. I think also with Gen Z, particularly Gen Z, but the younger generations in general, there's this skepticism and cynicism towards institutions and traditional ideas. So I think Gen Z looks at advisors and they say, they question their intentions. Are you positioning this to me because it's the best thing for me and what's going to help me achieve my goals in the best way? Or are you trying to potentially increase commission or revenue? So there's that question constantly happening. And then you see, in terms of traditional ideas, I think there's choice overload at the moment. There are so many products on offer. I think you can invest in pretty much anything now. You can invest in solar. You can have fractional investments in a farm. There's a lot more options now than there ever were for people in older generations at the same age. So we see this choice inertia. We don't want to make the wrong decision. There's so many options here. And I think, advice from advisors needs to meet people halfway there. We need to look at traditional products, but we also need to really look at kind of new age alternative products as well. And I think that's what younger generations really want to see. I think differences between older and younger generations, there are the younger generation's key focus is financial stability. It's, but even more so flexibility. Whereas the older generations, their goal was to, sink their roots into the ground and then grow from there. So I think the key differences, number one, access to information. Number two, trust in institutions. And number three being technology. I mean, there's apps that can do absolutely everything. There's, apps that can help you invest, apps that can, help you, that can analyze your spending behavior and tell you how to spend better. There's apps that can, help you save and invest towards a goal. And, there's robo-advisors that can basically give you financial advice without ever interacting with a human. So it's crazy times, but I think also exciting to see how we can kind of mix into this new age. Thank you.
Thanks, Shalia. I think sticking with your kind of 1 in 3 about digital and tech, Lloyd, I'm going to jump across to you. As you can hear from Shalia, we cannot escape this tech debate. Kind of tech to be or not to be. How do you view it from a Standard Bank kind of viewpoint? What does it mean from a client perspective? Is it an age thing? And perhaps would you mind sharing some lessons you learned from COVID?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Tech to be or not to be, I guess maybe we have been able to answer that question over the past couple of years. I don't think we can escape it anymore. If you think about the fact that we talk about accessibility, so there's now 80%, I would say, of people who are on smartphones today in South Africa. And, you know, the projections are saying in 2027 we'll probably be above 90%. The truth is, because everybody is now living in this environment, and also the accessibility to broadband. So everywhere you go now, you get Wi-Fi connectivity. You know, it is getting cheaper, even though there's always debates around the cost of broadband. But there is that push or pull to say that's the environment that we're living in. There's been a conversation this morning around generations, which I think is very important, maybe for the audience that's sitting here today, because some of you have been in the industry for 15 years plus. And some of these conversations have been going on for a number of years, and you're asking yourself, is it really going to happen? You know, we've heard this before, etc. So I think it's important to really zoom into why maybe it's taken longer, and what is it that's going to tilt things over. So we've mentioned the accessibility piece, etc. But the truth of the matter is, the baby boomers have actually retired, and they are retiring. The last bit of them are actually retiring. In my view, not to be offensive, I think the baby boomers have actually been the restriction for us getting across the line, because the baby boomers have done things differently in their previous lives, and for them to adapt to new technology when what they are currently using actually works, you know, it's not an easy thing to do. And let's also be fair to the baby boomers. The level of technology that they were exposed to earlier on was not as good as the technology that we have today. So I'm being kind now to the baby boomers. Then the reality is that most of the people in this room are probably, you know, the Generation X's, who are captains of industries, who are shaping the thinking, who are investing into technology and the change. They're basically putting money behind technology because they understand that their client base is actually changing. So you are the people that are going to facilitate this revolution. But at the same time, if you are running your own business, you need to think about also, you know, how is your business going to be structured to deal with this revolution? I love the generation subject because in my household, I live with these very strange people called Gen Zs. And the later version of Gen Zs, because they are the older ones, and then they are also the later version. The interesting thing about them, like you have mentioned, is that they are actually so intertwined with technology that there is no environment that is outside of technology and the environment that is in technology. You know, when growing up, in the household, you would ask your parents to say, you know what, I'd like to have this in the house, etc., and they will decide and they would do. A recent thing that has happened in my household is that I actually woke up the one day and this generation was controlling lights using AI and voice technology in my own house without me giving authorization or anything like that. And for me, that kind of scared me, but at the same time made me realize that if their older siblings are already hitting the workplace today, and they are also beginning to invest, you know, we've got something coming. But maybe as I come to a bit of a close for this particular question is, what does it mean to you as an IFA? What does it mean to you as a wealth manager? Is that this generation is inheriting money now from their baby boomers' parents. So they're going to have some loot to invest, but they're going to be engaging slightly differently. This generation, in the next 20 years, they're going to be captains of industry. They're going to be running economies, and they are the ones who are going to have the most wealth. The question is, have you actually set up your business to be able to absorb them? And if you're still going to be in business in the next, let's say you are in your 40s or maybe going to your 50s, you're going to still be in business in the next 20 years, and maybe at that time you'll be considering to sell your business. Someone who's going to be buying your business is going to be looking at the longevity of that business, and they want to see that the clients that are sitting in that business are actually these type of clients, in order for that business to have value and to be able to sell at the right price. So it's important for us to start now thinking about how do we actually onboard these clients so that we can be able to make sure that we future-proof our businesses going forward.
I fully agree, Lloyd. I must say at Harbour, we're on board with you. We even actually invested in another technology company that's building a simple kind of viewpoint or dashboard for our clients, bringing kind of everything that's important in their financial lives. So investments, offshore, tax, medical aid, life insurance, simply up to date, putting the power back in their hands. So we're with you 100% on the client, and you have to embrace tech. It's here to stay, guys, and it's here to make our businesses better. Another angle we need to consider as well is that tech is there to provide efficiencies across your businesses. A big worry and concern in our industry is that it costs a lot of money to look after clients. Let's be honest. There's a lot of money we spend on compliance, complexities, etc. We worry about, if we're spending that money here, what about everyone else we're not touching? What about everyone else that doesn't get access to quality financial advice? Tech allows that. And Lloyd, I want to stick with you on the tech aspect. We've spoken about access and people needing it. What about bringing it back home to investing? Is robo a threat? How do you see that playing out in the next 10 or so years?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, because I remember I was actually having a chuckle with Nerena earlier on, that we were somewhere in the trenches about 10 years ago, and we're talking about passive investing. And at that time, it was kind of like a swear word from active managers, and you did it at your own risk, talking about passive investing. But if you look at where we are today, the world has completely changed. And maybe going back to your question, the truth is, the quality of AI and the investment that has taken place in tech has been mind-blowing. So about 10 years or so ago, there were a number of robo-advice businesses that were set up in the US mainly, and then in the UK. They struggled to break even. And eventually, most of them were actually bought out by asset managers, and some of them were bought out by face-to-face advisory firms. It is a fact. However, if you think about what we've discussed earlier around the generations changing, you can almost join the dots that it was probably a timing issue. Because today, we are seeing a lot more of these companies actually doing a lot better. I guess the whole question is, what are the other factors that are also, driving this? We must remember that while we're in the financial services industry, these clients that we talk to, they are used to streaming movies and documentaries at the click of the button. So it's important that we actually build onto the work that was done 10 years ago in as far as robo. What we are also seeing is that it is not maybe an either or. but it is actually how do you integrate the human as well as the machine to actually come up with the best value proposition. So why do you say that? Is back in the day, I don't want to reveal my age, but back in the day, the value that we used to give to our clients as advisors was what? Was we actually went and collected information from them. We sent them statements, and the value was to make sure that we give them fancy and nice reports, etc. The truth of the matter is, with Robo, there's actually no value in that. Clients can access that at the click of the button. You know, the question is, how are we going to make sure that we remain relevant and we create value through understanding some of the behavioral traits, the fear, lots of stuff that is in the marketplace? How do you sift through it? How do you ensure that you handhold these clients to achieve their goals? The one analogy that normally works for me is from sports. So if you look at tennis and you look at golf, you know, they seem like they're individual sports because you are out there at the tennis court on your own, you know, or you are out on the golf course on your own. But have you seen how when a tennis player wins a tournament, they quickly run to their coach and they actually embrace their coach to acknowledge that some of the techniques that the coach was helping them with helped them to achieve actually the championship. I believe that's going to be the biggest role of the financial advisors. They merge the human, the AI, etc. Because if I look at the bank as an example, we've invested billions, you know, in as far as AI is concerned, processing information, packaging information, that can be done at the click of the button. But that coaching, that hand-holding, that ensuring that our clients stick to the goals, I could even suspect that the new generation wealth managers are going to have to study more psychology than actually studying financial and wealth management. Thank you.
I'm with you, Lloyd. It's kind of, we get overpaid to manage money and underpaid to manage people.
Yeah.
Let's be honest about that. So definitely tech and touch model, guys. That's what we're hearing here. Kagisho, I'm not forgetting about you down there, I promise. I'd like to ask you, Kagisho, do you believe intergenerational wealth means the same thing to all people? Or are there specific nuances that we need to talk about and elaborate on in South Africa?
Good day, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. So don't worry about missing me. If you're short and black, many people miss you. Melissa, just to answer you, I think Lloyd has touched on a few things. You know, I was listening to Shalia and Lloyd talk about these generations. I mean, our business is an independent financial advisory business, wealth management business, and we work predominantly in the affluent black market. So we're talking professionals, we're talking senior executives, and an entrepreneur space. What has been interesting for us is our market doesn't quite fit these descriptions that Shalia is talking about, generation, baby boomers, and what the baby boomers did. What we found in our market that the generation that we're working with, these Gen Zs or Gen Xs, I'm not even sure which one is which, don't have anything to inherit from the previous generation. So these are the generation that we've called the sandwich generation. These are a generation that has to take care of the baby boomers and these guys that are switching lights in Lloyd's house. But now they have an added level where, because of the economic and political struggles we have in the country, they're almost becoming a bit of a Dagwood or generation, because now they have to take care of their siblings and their siblings' kids. So the economic requirement and pressure that sits with them is actually incredibly enormous. So creating generational wealth, advising them in a way to pass on generational wealth is becoming increasingly difficult for the generation that we're talking about. And then to make things worse, divorce is playing havoc, and there's an increasing divorce rate that you're facing in this particular market that we're sitting. So where you were at one stage managing a family's affairs to pass on wealth from one estate, you suddenly are sitting with two estates now, with the same kids now going to inherit from two different estates. Not only that, because of what we just saw from Ndivhuho's presentation, they are leaving the country. So it used to be white individuals, but actually black professionals are leaving the country as well. Now, not only do you have to manage what you have here, you have to manage what they have outside of the country. So it's becoming a very complex environment. And those very kids themselves are not planning a future here, they're planning a future outside of the country. So a financial advisor today that's dealing with high net worth individuals, whether it's in the white kind of market, in the traditional black market, is facing a lot of very complex things to look at. So there's definitely nuances that we're finding in the market that we're working in here. The third problem we're facing is these are highly educated individuals, very sophisticated. They will know about crypto before you do. Okay, they will know about Section 12J investments before you do. So the advisor that sits in this market really has to be highly technically knowledgeable. They need to be on top of the things. They need to understand how tax works. So the technical knowledge required in this particular environment is actually quite alarming. But the beauty about it is, I mean, if we look at our book, our average age is probably between 48 and 50. This is the bedrock of the middle age of the country. And this market has seen incredible wealth growth, but it's the first generation of wealth accumulators. So that you fund a lot of even that wealth, it's very difficult to pass it on to the next wealth because of to the next generation, because of what I said earlier. So what you then have to do is be pretty creative in how you create that wealth. So a lot of them think they'll be able to leave money for their kids, but they're just simply not generating enough to take care of the parents that don't have enough retirement money, to take care of kids that are sitting in private schools, and these ones in private middle schools, in curos, if you can put it like that, because there's simply not enough wealth going around in the extended family. So Lloyd talks about how advisors of the future need to study psychology. So we found that our greatest value actually sits in the EQ space.
Yeah.
It's spending the first half an hour just listening to the divorce woes, listening to the kids that don't listen to parents that are financially dependent on them, just listening for half an hour. By the time you get to discussing the actual portfolio itself, they actually know already because they've got the statement. What they come to you for is what the robo-advisor cannot do, is what the numbers cannot do, but it is really the management of the people at that level. So my take on this is that, it's nice, the theory is fantastic, still I'm not taking anything away from it, but you definitely need to be able to apply it in your own practice to see the things that are actually happening there. What is fantastic though is when it comes to tech, if I can touch just on the tech issue, for us what we're seeing as far as tech is concerned, we don't think it's a threat to the financial advisor in the near future. Where you definitely need it is in the efficiencies. Okay, because the reporting that the client needs today, you can't just take a policy statement like you did 30 years ago. You literally, if you look at a typical client portfolio on our side, you're going to have a client that's got offshore investments, they've got alternatives, so we did Section 12Js for them when it was open, they've got hedge funds in that portfolio, they've got normal unit trust in that portfolio, they've got endowment in that portfolio, and then they've got, because they're business person, a buy and sell agreement that they've done. So on a manual level to try and prepare that review for that client, it's impossible. So that's why you have to invest in technology. But you mustn't see the technology as a threat to your role, but rather as an enhancer of the service that you can offer to your client. So I don't think advisors should be too worried that robo-advisor will take their jobs, not in the next 20, because even these young ones, they use the technology to do the research, and then they look for a human being to bounce it off.
You're right, Kagisho. They want the advice. No longer the days that they're looking for us to sell them a product, guys. They want the advice. That's what they need. I mean, touching on what you mentioned earlier about kids living all over in different jurisdictions, we've just come off the back of our 2-day investment committee meeting at Harbour, and I promise you, one full day is always about the markets and asset allocation and everything that we used to think was all important. The next full day is on all of these things. I promise you, we've continuously upskilling on what happens when you leave your wealth and your kids now living in Australia, in China, in the US. You can't just have a normal discretionary investment. 40% of that's gone to inheritance taxes. Guys, you think SARS is bad. Other tax authorities are a nightmare. So you work your whole life protecting this and growing this money, and then someone else takes it. So we're with you completely. If I can stick with you, Kagisho, what does the changing landscape in South Africa mean for future-proofing an independent financial advisory firm?
Okay. Look, Melissa, the tech goes without saying. If you're not adopting tech in your practice, you are going to fall behind. But I think for this particular environment, if I can, because you can't escape race in the country, what you're finding is that in our business, that the two generations, at least that we're dealing with, because the baby boomers are dying off. I nearly said fortunately, but this is, but purely from a disruption of planning perspective, is practices that are not adopting younger advisors into their practice are definitely going to have a problem going forward. Because I struggle to talk to a 28-year-old guy because I don't understand what he's saying. Their concentration levels are like this much, okay? And then in 5 minutes, they're on their phone while you're still sitting in it. It is incredibly frustrating for me to sit with a 28, 25-year-old to try and explain. And in the meantime, they are beneficiaries of a trust, this multi-million rand trust that I'm managing for their parents, that suddenly is going to pass on to them. If I'm unable to communicate with them now, and I don't have a 28, 30-year-old in my business to be able to communicate with God, we're going to lose that money, okay? And if I don't present the information to that 28-year-old in a format that he can pick it up on his phone and be able to go through it, I'm in trouble. I'm going to lose that individual. In fact, the young planners in our business, the biggest fight I have with them is, why are you giving me a proposal and there's a couple of errors? Print this thing, sit in the canteen and read through it. They don't print anything. They don't print anything. But now I need to find technology that can help them read these things, because they don't read either. So it's a very big, it's a very big dilemma that we have. So simply from a future proofing perspective, you must adopt technology. You must get new advisors in your business. You must train them from a technical perspective, but you must allow them to deal with the younger generation. Otherwise, your business will be done in the next 10 years.
Fully agree, Kagisho.
Yeah.
I must say, guys, at Harbour, what we've had to do, because think about it, we've all been in this industry, well, not we all, maybe we've all been in the industry for quite a while. You forget how tough it is to break in, guys. Barriers to entry in our space are massive. Think about how much it costs to set up your own sole prop, your own FSP. Just the time you take on remaining compliant, all the SIPC that needs to happen, secretarial, HR, it's tough. What we've had to do at Harbour, to your point as well, Kagisho, is start an intern program, which it's not easy, let's be honest. You're dealing with people's dramas and young and young ladies as well.
Yeah.
And young, I don't know how to say it PC, but others, them, a lot.
Everyone.
So everyone, let's be inclusive, everyone. And we're trying to kind of instill like a lawyer practice type approach. Because you don't want to give a guy 2 months training, he flogs a product. That's not what we're about anymore, guys. They need to grow with your business, be exposed to all these high-level conversations we have with our clients, the value we add, so that when you finally start integrating them into your client base, they're giving the same quality advice as we are. But it's tough. It's tough to keep them, tough to train them, because you are right. They leave. It's tough. You just got to hope you're doing it.
The banks take them.
I know. I hear you. So Lloyd, sticking with this next generation, these tough folks we find difficult to discuss and keep their concentration. How do you expect the next generation to be willing to do business with Standard Bank? Are they going to be able to? What they're looking for? What are you guys doing to make sure it happens?
Yeah, thanks. I see I've not made friends here on this panel this morning because I seem to be recruiting all of their well-trained advisors. But I must say that, as an organization, we have been quite deliberate in investing in people. So you talk about the difficulty of, attracting the young blood and training them. I think we are a bit more fortunate on that regard as a big financial services organization. Just yesterday, I signed off, an intake of 20 interns that we're going to be taking through the next 2 years on our program. And they're not the first intake that we have done. We continue to do that. So it's quite important. We're looking for these Gen Zs, and this is where I agree with Kagisho, is that they are a different breed. So we need them to also not just for them to work for us, but to help us navigate through these things, because we also don't know it all. So it's amazing the insights that we get from them, and so people being the biggest investment, and second biggest investment is again what we've been talking about. Is you might have read about our organization in as far as what we are doing from a cloud computing perspective, the partnerships that we have set up with Amazon Web Services and Salesforce to ensure that when they hit our environment, they do not find this 160-year-old organization behaving like it's 160 years old, and it's like in the dark ages. So it's to create an environment, technologically, that is conducive for them as well as our clients. And interestingly enough, as well, if you think about the older generation, for me, one thing that I like about the older generation is that they have gone through all the changes. So earlier on I spoke about the younger generation in my household, but I've also observed the older generation, which is basically my parents, and how they engage with technology. And it's amazing to see they are slower in adopting, but the moment they adopt something and it really works for them, they run with it. So once they actually get to understand the streaming devices, you cannot take them away from the streaming devices. Once they understand that they don't need to drive 5 kilometers to the bank to actually make a transfer and make certain payments, they love that. So the interesting thing is that all of us are in different journeys to adoption, but then that is why our second biggest investment has to be in technology and making sure that all of these clients are actually accommodated. There's a study that I spent time going through. So it's done by Accenture, working with Harvard University, of what are the outcomes of companies that have spent an enormous amount of money investing in digital technology. The results are mind-blowing, because there were 8,300 clients that were looked at in 2019, and then 2 years ago, they looked at another 4,000 clients. And if you look at revenue numbers and the trajectory from a revenue perspective, some of the companies are 5xing the companies that are not investing adequately into technological transformation or digital transformation. So I guess as an organization that is 160 years old, we can use, one, our influence in as far as what we stand for, because also what we've seen is that, the clients that are coming through, they don't only look at what you can deliver from a financial outcomes perspective only, but they're interested to know, what do you stand for? Do you stand for a clean planet? Do you stand for, sustainability? Those things are becoming important. So as an organization, that we have focused on, as well as investing in technology, as well as people. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Shalia, from your youthful perspective and with your background, how can we in this room, practical steps, what can we do as financial planners to accept and move?
So I think, you guys raised some great points around, embedding technology and having young advisors, but I think you raised something quite nice around really relating to and understanding your clients of the younger generation. And so, maybe some practical ways to do this. Number one being, understanding your clients' information sources. Literally asking them in a meeting, how do you get your information? What do you like about this? What do you resonate with regards to this? and so that you can deliver the way that you give them financial planning in a way that they can relate to, which is really, really important. I think maybe moving on to avoiding the curse of knowledge. So the curse of knowledge is when, you know a lot about the topic that you know about. You guys know a lot about investing, and you may assume that people know similar or maybe a little bit more than they already know. So really avoiding that curse of knowledge to say, break down concepts in very simple ways. Avoid technical jargon. I mean, just an example around breaking concepts down. I remember being 24, 25, meeting with my financial advisor for the first time, and he asked me, how much money do you want per month when you retire? I had absolutely no idea how to answer that question. I, barely knew how much my expenses were going to be in 2 years' time versus, 40 years' time. So really breaking down those concepts is super, super important. I think there's a concept of egoism as well. No one wants to admit that they don't know something. So if you're having a conversation with your client and they're young and you're using this technical jargon and these questions that they may not understand, they leave feeling a little bit exhausted, and eventually they don't ask you questions around what does that actually mean. They just disengage. And so after the session, they don't feel like they can relate to you. They don't feel like they can, approach you as this point of information, and that's when they go back to their, social media and their, online research. You really want to form yourself as the point of information for these clients. Then I think goals-based financial planning is a big one. People want to know that you know them. The younger generation hates the financial needs analysis. They don't want to feel like a piece of paper, another number. They want to know that you care about the goals that they care about, and you're going to help them get there. So really, when you're talking to them and when you're, approaching them with advice and approaching them with solutions, really you're able to relate back to their goals, which immediately makes it more relevant to them. They're immediately going to intake that information way better than before. I think when doing financial goals planning, my advice would be, or goals-based financial planning, would be to make the goals tangible. It's not enough to say, is your goal that you want to retire comfortably? We need to break down these goals into smaller, bite-sized pieces that have emotional ties. This is a generation that is, instant gratification nation. We're not thinking about retirement. We want to retire comfortably, but I know we also want to go to Europe, next month. I don't know. So I think asking questions like, what type of house do you see yourself living in when you're retired? What do you see yourself doing with your grandchildren? Have that imagery, that emotional connection in their minds, and that's when you can bridge that gap, that 40-year, gap. And then you have, I think, an interesting concept. I think my last concept would be the fresh start effect. So people are more likely to they're more likely to start new behaviors, new goals in this certain temporal time frame. So people are more likely to start going to gym in January. People are more likely to start a diet on a Monday. I think you've seen students, I'm sure maybe with your kids, when they're studying, they're like, I'm going to start studying at 8 a.m. today. And then it's 8:06, and they're like, well, I just can't study. I've passed the time, so let me just start at 9. So I think making use of the fresh start effect to say, maybe have meetings with your younger clients on a Monday. Give them material to read on a Monday, or, so that they can mentally in their minds say, okay, I'm taking charge of my financial future. I am starting this new behavior, because they're more likely to want to go along with it from that fresh start.
Thank you, Shalia. So giving us really good practical steps on what we have to do. Kagisho, with your experience, very briefly in closing, can we do it as an industry? Can we change?
We most certainly can, and we have, and we most certainly have to. We don't have much of a choice. I think, to me, the only challenge that we might have to relook is, over the last few years, a lot of particularly independent practices have kind of gone the specialist route. So they said, we kind of specialize in retirement and investments, some specialize in risk. I'm just finding that as we move into an environment where our clients just don't have enough time to go and have 6, 7 different meetings with 6, 7 different people, that we have to come a multidimensional practice. We've got to have one meeting. You might have to, we often bring 2 or 3 specialists into the same meeting, but you can't ask your client to go get estate planning from someone else. You will just do these investments. That environment is changing, and it's changing very quickly, and I think we need to adapt to it. But as I said earlier on, the one area we definitely need to adopt into is just the behavioral stuff. That is where 90% of our value is going to sit, but making sure that the technical side, which is really par for the course, there's no differentiator there, is the one environment we cannot neglect. And I think the FPI has now started a subject from a training perspective on the psychology of financial planning, because that's becoming the big value add as far as our practices are concerned. Okay.
I agree, Kagisho. Guys, you can see we could go on and on for hours here. The passion, the insights, I love it. 1nvest said, guys, are you going to be able to keep going for 45 minutes? Well, we're going to have it longer. So thank you for sharing the stage with me, everyone. Thank you for listening to us, guys. Hope we really gave you some practical steps about what you can think about for you, your practice, and your clients. Thank you, everyone.